Timmy worked tirelessly, rolling the snow into the perfect sphere for the snowman's base. He grinned with satisfaction as the bottom portion took shape, standing tall and sturdy. Next, he carefully crafted the midsection, packing the snow tight to create a solid form. As Timmy placed the final piece atop the snowman, he stepped back to admire his creation. The snowman's coal eyes sparkled in the winter sun, and the carrot nose Timmy had scavenged from the family's vegetable garden gave the figure a whimsical charm. Reaching into his coat pocket, Timmy retrieved a scarf and wrapped it snugly around the snowman's neck. "There, now you look perfect," Timmy exclaimed, beaming with pride. He had poured his heart and soul into this project, and seeing the finished product filled him with a sense of pure joy. Tromping through the powdery snow, Timmy dashed inside to fetch a few finishing touches, a top hat and a broom to place in the snowman's frozen hands. Just as Timmy was about to head back outside, he caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of his eye. Peering through the living room window, he spotted the dreaded HOA president, Karen, glaring in the direction of his snowman. Timmy felt a pit form in his stomach. He knew Karen was not one to be trifled with. Ever since the Wilson family had moved into the neighborhood a year ago, Karen had made it her mission to enforce the community's strict bylaws with an iron fist. She had already issued multiple warning letters to Timmy's parents for minor infractions, such as a crooked mailbox or having their trash cans visible from the street on non-collection days. Timmy had learned early on to avoid crossing paths with the relentless HOA president. As Karen's icy stare intensified, Timmy's heart began to race. He watched in dismay as she snatched her shovel from the porch and started marching across the freshly fallen snow toward his beloved snowman. Timmy burst through the front door, desperate to reason with the formidable woman. "Mrs. Karen, please don't. I worked so hard on my snowman," Timmy pleaded, his voice trembling. "It's not hurting anything, I promise." But Karen's expression remained set in a scowl as she continued her determined march. "That _thing_ is an eyesore and a violation of the community guidelines," she spat, her grip tightening on the shovel's handle. "It has to go." Timmy's eyes widened in horror as Karen raised a shovel, poised to strike. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the impending destruction of his beloved creation. The sound of the shovel hitting the packed snow made Timmy flinch, and he peeked open one eye to witness the heartbreaking scene unfolding before him. With ruthless efficiency, Karen began dismantling the snowman, sending the compacted snow flying in all directions. Timmy watched helplessly as the carrot nose was unceremoniously tossed aside, followed by the scarf and the top hat. Each blow of the shovel chipped away at the snowman's form, reducing it to a pile of scattered snowballs. "No, stop," Timmy cried, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're ruining it." But Karen seemed impervious to the boy's pleas, her focus solely on the task of eliminating the perceived eyesore from the pristine neighborhood landscape. As the last vestiges of the snowman crumbled to the ground, Timmy felt his heart shatter. Tears streamed down his face as he turned and ran back into the house, desperate to escape the heartbreaking scene. From the warmth of her living room, Karen watched with satisfaction as the last remnants of Timmy's snowman were reduced to a scattered pile of snow. She leaned back in her armchair, her lips curling into a self-righteous smile. As the president of the Homeowners Association, Karen took immense pride in maintaining the neighborhood's impeccable aesthetic. Every blade of grass, every freshly painted fence, all of it had to adhere to her exacting standards, and that infernal snowman with its crooked smile and haphazardly arranged accessories was an affront to everything she held dear. Karen glanced down at the neatly typed bylaws resting on the side table, her fingers tracing the crisp edges of the pages. There, in black and white, were the rules that governed this community, and she was its unwavering enforcer. No eyesores, no unapproved structures, and certainly no tacky winter decorations that dared to mar the pristine landscape. With a huff, Karen rose from her chair and made her way to the front door, shovel still in hand. She needed to ensure that every last trace of that abominable snowman was removed. Stepping outside, the bitter winter air nipped at her exposed skin, but Karen barely noticed. Her focus was solely on the task at hand. As she surveyed the aftermath of her destruction, a small part of her felt a twinge of guilt. The boy, Timmy, had looked so devastated, his tearful pleas tugging at her heartstrings. But Karen quickly pushed those feelings aside. Rules are rules, she thought firmly. The community comes first. Just as Karen was about to turn and head back inside, a movement in the corner of her eye caught her attention. Across the street, Timmy's father was striding toward her, his expression thunderous. Karen tightened her grip on the shovel, bracing herself for the confrontation. "You've got some nerve, picking on a kid's snowman," the burly man bellowed, looming over Karen's petite frame. His face was flushed with anger, veins bulging at his temples. Karen straightened her posture, trying to appear unintimidated. "That _thing_ was an eyesore and a direct violation of the community guidelines," she retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. "I was simply upholding the rules that everyone in this neighborhood has agreed to follow." Timmy's father took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "Well, let me make something clear to you, _Karen_, he growled. "No one messes with my boy's snowman and gets away with it." Timmy watched helplessly from the living room window as his father confronted the formidable HOA president. His heart was still racing from the traumatic destruction of his beloved snowman, and now he feared for his father's safety. Karen was a force to be reckoned with, and Timmy knew firsthand how unyielding she could be. As the two adults squared off on the snow-covered lawn, Timmy could see the anger radiating from his father's imposing frame. The vein pulsing at his temple betrayed his struggle to keep his emotions in check. Karen, on the other hand, stood her ground, her chin held high and her eyes narrowed in defiance. "Well, let me make something clear to you, _Karen_, Timmy's father growled. "No one messes with my boy's snowman and gets away with it." Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "I was simply upholding the rules that everyone in this neighborhood has agreed to follow," she retorted, her tone dripping with disdain. "That _thing_ was an eyesore and a direct violation of the community guidelines." Timmy's father took a menacing step forward, towering over the petite woman. "Eyesore my ass," he spat. "That snowman was bringing joy to my son, and you had no right to destroy it." Karen's grip tightened on the shovel, her knuckles turning white. "I have every right," she hissed. "As the president of the Homeowners Association, it is my duty to ensure that this community maintains its impeccable standards." A tense silence fell over the scene as the two adversaries glared at each other, the air thick with unspoken threats. Timmy held his breath, praying that his father would back down and avoid a confrontation that could have dire consequences. Just then, the front door of the house across the street burst open, and Karen's husband, Bob, emerged, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is going on out here?" he bellowed, stomping through the snow toward the standoff. Timmy's father turned to face the new threat, his posture tensing. "Your wife here just demolished my son's snowman," he growled. "I'm not about to let that slide." Bob's eyes narrowed as he rounded on Karen. "You did what?" he snapped. "That was Timmy's snowman? The one he worked so hard on." Karen opened her mouth to defend her actions, but before she could speak, Bob shoved past her, marching toward Timmy's father with his fists clenched. "No one messes with my family, you hear me?" he shouted, his voice laced with fury. Timmy watched in horror as the two men began to grapple, their shouts echoing through the neighborhood. He wanted to run outside and stop the fight, but he was paralyzed by fear, his eyes glued to the escalating confrontation. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Timmy knew that it was only a matter of time before things took an even darker turn. Timmy's father, a former Marine with a fierce protective streak, refused to back down as Bob charged toward him, his face contorted with rage. Years of military training had honed his reflexes, and he braced himself for the impending impact. With a mighty shove, Timmy's father pushed Bob back, sending the enraged husband stumbling backward through the snow. "I warned you, no one messes with my boy's snowman," he thundered, his voice commanding and uncompromising. Bob regained his footing, his eyes narrowing as he glared at the towering figure before him. "You've got a lot of nerve trying to tell me and my wife how to run our neighborhood," he spat, his hands balling into fists. Karen, sensing the situation was spiraling out of control, stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on her husband's arm. "Bob, let's not do anything rash," she pleaded, her usual confidence wavering. But Bob shrugged off her touch, his focus solely on Timmy's father. "No one makes a fool of me and gets away with it," he growled, his voice laced with menace. Timmy's father stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not the one making a fool of anyone," he retorted. "You and your wife are the ones causing trouble in this neighborhood." The tension in the air was palpable as the two men stared each other down, their chests heaving with each labored breath. Timmy watched from the window, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew his father was more than capable of defending himself, but the thought of the men coming to blows filled him with dread. Just then, Bob's eyes narrowed as a sudden realization dawned on him. "Wait a minute, I know who you are," he said, a malicious grin spreading across his face. "You're the new guy who moved in last year, the one who's always causing problems with the HOA. Timmy's father tensed, his jaw tightening. "I haven't caused any problems," he growled. "I've simply been standing up for my family and our rights as homeowners." Bob let out a harsh laugh. "Well, that ends today," he declared, his voice dripping with ominous intent. "No one makes a fool of the Homeowners Association and gets away with it." With that, Bob turned on his heel and stormed back toward his house, leaving Timmy's father and Karen standing in the snow, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. Timmy watched helplessly as Bob flung open the door to his SUV and climbed behind the wheel, the engine roaring to life. The young boy's stomach twisted with fear, knowing that his father's confrontation with the HOA power couple was far from over. As Bob's SUV peeled out of the driveway, Timmy felt his heart leap into his throat. The look of fury on the man's face told him that this was far from over. Pressing his face against the living room window, he watched with bated breath as the large vehicle careened down the street, its tires kicking up a spray of snow in its wake. Timmy's father stood his ground, his eyes narrowed as he tracked the SUV's movements. Karen hovered nearby, her expression a mixture of concern and defiance. The air was thick with tension, and Timmy could feel the electricity crackling between the two adults. Suddenly, Bob's SUV made a sharp turn, heading straight for Timmy's father. The burly man braced himself, ready to meet the oncoming vehicle head-on. But as the SUV drew closer, Timmy noticed something that made his blood run cold: the scattered remains of his beloved Snowman scattered across the road. "Dad, look out!" Timmy cried, his voice piercing the still winter air. Timmy's father whirled around, his eyes widening as he saw the treacherous obstacle in the SUV's path. But it was too late. With a deafening crunch, the vehicle struck the remnants of the Snowman, the impact sending it careening wildly across the lawn. Timmy watched in horror as the SUV veered out of control, its tires losing traction on the icy ground. The massive vehicle careened toward his father, its trajectory aimed straight for the spot where the burly man stood, frozen in shock. In a desperate attempt to avoid a collision, Timmy's father dove to the side, narrowly escaping the SUV's path. The vehicle continued its wild trajectory, slamming into a nearby tree with a deafening crash that shook the entire neighborhood. Thick plumes of smoke and steam billowed from the mangled remains of the SUV, and Timmy's father scrambled to his feet, his eyes scanning the scene with a mixture of disbelief and relief. Karen, who had been standing nearby, rushed to the wrecked vehicle, her face pale with shock. Timmy watched the unfolding drama from the safety of the living room, his hands trembling. He had witnessed the destruction of his Snowman, and now, it seemed, the tables had turned. The icy creation he had poured his heart into had somehow exacted its own form of revenge. As the neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion, Timmy saw his father approach the wrecked SUV, a grim expression on his face. He knew that his father had been pushed to the brink, and he couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The once mighty HOA president, Karen, stood helplessly by her husband's side, her perfectly coiffed hair disheveled and her usual confidence shattered. Timmy couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, even as a part of him ached for the pain and fear he had witnessed in her eyes. The neighborhood had been forever changed by the battle over Timmy's Snowman, and the young boy couldn't help but wonder what other icy surprises the winter might have in store. The deafening crash of Bob's SUV slamming into the nearby tree sent shockwaves through the entire neighborhood. Timmy watched from the safety of the living room window, his heart pounding in his chest, as the mangled remains of the vehicle came to a halt, thick plumes of smoke and steam billowing into the air. Timmy's father, having narrowly avoided being struck by the out-of-control SUV, scrambled to his feet, his eyes scanning the scene with a mixture of disbelief and relief. Karen, her usually impeccable composure shattered, rushed to the wrecked vehicle, her face pale with terror. As the neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion, Timmy's father approached the twisted metal and shattered glass, his expression grim. Timmy couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, even as a part of him ached for the pain and fear he had witnessed in Karen's eyes. The once mighty HOA president stood helpless, her perfectly coiffed hair disheveled, as she hovered beside the damaged SUV, her hands trembling. Timmy's father paused for a moment, his gaze locked with Karen's, before turning his attention to the vehicle. Timmy held his breath, watching as his father peered through the shattered driver's side window, searching for any sign of movement. After what seemed like an eternity, Bob's battered form finally emerged, his clothes torn and his face streaked with blood. Timmy's father reached out, steadying the dazed man as he stumbled away from the wreckage. Karen rushed to her husband's side, her eyes wide with panic. "Bob, oh my God, are you all right?" she cried, her voice shrill with worry. Bob blinked, his expression dazed as he leaned against his wife for support. I think so, he mumbled, his words slurred. What the hell happened? Karen's gaze darted from the wrecked SUV to the scattered remains of Timmy's snowman, her face etched with realization. You hit the snowman, she whispered, her voice trembling. You lost control of the vehicle because of that _thing_. Bob's eyes widened, and he stared at his wife in disbelief. The snowman? He echoed, his brow furrowing in confusion. But how? Karen shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. It doesn't matter, she said hastily, her gaze sweeping across the growing crowd of onlookers. We need to get you to a hospital. As the neighborhood gathered around the scene, Timmy couldn't help but feel a strange sense of vindication. The tables had turned, and the once mighty HOA president stood helpless, her carefully curated facade crumbling before his eyes. Timmy knew that this was no mere accident. It was the icy revenge of his beloved snowman, a testament to the power of winter's whimsy. And as he watched the unfolding drama, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the winter might have in store. As the stunned neighbors gathered around the wrecked SUV, Timmy couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction wash over him. The once formidable HOA president, Karen, stood helpless, her perfectly coiffed hair disheveled and her usual confident demeanor shattered. Timmy's father, his expression grim, hovered near the damaged vehicle, his eyes fixed on the battered form of Bob as he leaned against his wife for support. The realization of what had just transpired seemed to dawn on the couple, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and disbelief. You hit the snowman, Karen whispered, her voice trembling. You lost control of the vehicle because of that _thing_. Bob blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. The snowman? He echoed, his words slurred. But how? Karen shook her head, clearly unwilling to entertain the notion that Timmy's innocent winter creation had played a role in the calamity that had unfolded. It doesn't matter, she said hastily, her gaze sweeping across the growing crowd of onlookers. We need to get you to a hospital. As the stunned neighbors watched the unfolding drama, Timmy couldn't help but feel a surge of vindication. The tables had turned, and the once mighty HOA president stood helpless, her carefully curated facade crumbling before his eyes. Timmy knew that this was no mere accident. It was the icy revenge of his beloved snowman, a testament to the power of winter's whimsy. And as he watched the scene unfold, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the winter might have in store. Some of the neighbors, their lips curled in amusement, exchanged knowing glances, as if they too had witnessed the snowman's silent retribution. Others, however, seemed more concerned for the well-being of Bob, who was still clearly disoriented from the impact. Timmy's father, his stance unwavering, approached the couple, his expression unreadable. I hope your husband is all right, he said, his voice even and controlled. But let this be a lesson to both of you. Don't mess with the kids' winter creations. Karen's face flushed with a mixture of shame and anger. But before she could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Timmy's father turned and headed back toward the house, his shoulders square and his head held high. As the paramedics arrived and tended to Bob, Karen hovered nearby, her usually icy demeanor melting into one of genuine concern. Timmy watched from the safety of the living room, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The neighborhood had been forever changed by the battle over his snowman, and Timmy couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the icy revenge his creation had wrought. It was a reminder that even the smallest of winter wonders could pack a powerful punch. As the medical personnel tended to the battered Bob, Karen remained by his side, her usual icy composure shattered. Timmy watched the scene unfold from the safety of the living room, a sense of vindication swelling within him. Timmy's father, his stance unwavering, approached the distraught couple, his expression unreadable. I hope your husband is all right, he said, his voice even and controlled. But let this be a lesson to both of you. Don't mess with the kids' winter creations. Karen's face flushed with a mixture of shame and anger, but before she could respond, the wail of approaching sirens filled the air. Timmy's father turned and headed back toward the house, his shoulders square and his head held high. Timmy couldn't help but admire his father's stoic demeanor in the face of such a tumultuous confrontation. The burly man had stood his ground, refusing to back down even as the situation threatened to spiral out of control. Timmy felt a surge of pride, knowing that his father had fought to defend the honor of his beloved snowman. As the paramedics tended to Bob, Karen hovered nearby, her usual icy composure melting into one of genuine concern. Timmy watched the scene unfold, his lips curling into a wry smile. The tables had turned, and the once mighty HOA president stood helpless, her carefully curated facade crumbling before his eyes. Timmy knew that this was no mere accident. It was the icy revenge of his beloved snowman, a testament to the power of winter's whimsy. And as he observed the unfolding drama, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises the season might have in store. Some of the neighbors, their lips curled in amusement, exchanged knowing glances as if they too had witnessed the snowman's silent retribution. Others, however, seemed more concerned for the well-being of Bob, whose condition remained uncertain. As the emergency responders loaded the injured man into the ambulance, Karen stepped forward, her expression stricken. Timmy watched as she cast a furtive glance in the direction of his family's home, her eyes meeting his father's for a brief moment. Timmy's father, his lips curling into a wry smile, placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "See, Timmy? Sometimes the good guys do win," he said, his voice tinged with a sense of pride. Timmy beamed up at his father, his heart swelling with joy. From that day on, the neighborhood knew that crossing the young boy and his winter creations was a surefire way to invite their own icy downfall. The snowman had had the last laugh, and Timmy couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction in knowing that his beloved creation had exacted its own unique brand of revenge. As the cleanup crews arrived to tend to the wrecked SUV, Timmy turned and headed back inside, secure in the knowledge that the winter's whimsy was not to be trifled with. The icy lessons of the day would linger long after the snow had melted, a testament to the power of a child's imagination and the folly of those who dared to cross it.